See, injustice, when it's in the foundations of a city, a nation, or a community, it causes the land to become sick. And because the land is sick, it brings upon it a number of consequences. In the Old Testament, it says, "Woe to the city built upon bloodshed." You see, injustice, when it's in the foundations of a city, a nation, or a community, it causes the land to become sick. And because the land is sick, it brings upon it, or brings with it in the spiritual realm, a number of consequences. Because when we violate the image of God, it can cause in the spiritual realm breaches or gaps in the wall of righteousness. This is where in Ezekiel it says, "I looked for a man who would stand in the gap on behalf of the land." What is that gap? It's the gap between the righteousness of God and the intention of heaven and the brokenness of man and the fallen nature of the world. Of course, Jesus becomes the one who comes and stands in that gap and bridges it. But then he raises up a people, a whole family of kings and priests who would stand in the gap with him and cultivate the earth and be salt and light to see the land healed and prepare the way of the Lord for the new Jerusalem to come. Now, these historic violations of the character and the nature of God by violating one another cause consequences such as curses, pathologies of oppression, ways of thinking and worldviews that are out of alignment with the kingdom values, transgenerational wounding, wounds that happen to one generation of oppressed people and then they get passed on from generation to generation. And then enculturated pain, where coping mechanisms and survival mechanisms that were developed just to survive an atmosphere of oppression, those survival mechanisms become part of culture and embraced, even if those mechanisms are out of alignment with the best intentions or the best version of ourselves that God has created us to be. What also comes with these types of violations are openings for demonic activity, demonic possession, demonic ideological beliefs, and then finally, post-traumatic stress. We saw all of these symptoms and we're seeing it increase daily in our generation as it relates to the racial conversations and even the political conversations here in our cultural context here in the West particularly. We see that people are becoming more and more radicalized. Our political environment's becoming more and more divided, and our racial conversation is becoming more and more complex and difficult to deal with. This is an indication to us that there are spiritual realities and forces and dynamics at work that we, the body of Christ, have been called to heal. One example in the natural is from 2020, when cities were filled with rage and people online were pointing the finger and yelling at each other and calling each other all kinds of names. People on the political left and the political right, because it was an election year. People who were white and people who were black who were missing each other and not understanding each other. People who worked in law enforcement and civilians who were battling each other, civic officials. We were calling each other fools online, hiding behind our avatars. But Matthew 5 says this, "You have heard that it was said of old," this is Matthew 5:21, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that who is ever angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire." You see, murder begins in the heart with what we say, with how we view the other, the person who we have a disagreement with, and what we call them. When we relegate them to the realm of the other, and we dehumanize them and begin to call them a fool, we open the door for murderous activity. In fact, statistically, in 2019, the number of murders jumped relative to 2019. In 2021, the number of murders jumped by more than 30% in the largest cities and by more than 20% in places designated by the FBI as suburban. Despite politicized claims that this rise was the result of criminal justice reform in liberal-leaning jurisdictions, murders rose roughly equally in cities run by Republicans and cities run by Democrats. So-called red states actually saw some of the highest murder rates of all. Because this spirit of murder rose in our hearts, we began to see an outworking of that murder in streets, suburban and urban, all over America. It says in Numbers 35 that no atonement can be made for the land on which blood has been shed, except by the blood of the one who shed it. This is Old Testament. But the New Covenant says that Jesus is the one who takes the guilt and the shame of the murder in our hearts and the murder in our hands. And he said, I will become the sacrifice, and by my shed blood, I will atone for the sin and even the blood that cries out in the land. Justice comes through Jesus. And we, being the Jesus people now, have been commissioned to walk the land and to appropriate the finished work of cross. We have been commissioned by Jesus to now participate with him in reconciling all things to himself. So here's a practical thing that we can do. If my people will humble themselves and pray, turn from their wicked ways, seek my face, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sins, and heal the land. What if you and I begin to say, you know what? We want the crime rates in our city to go down. We want to see the land where we live healed, because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So that means with the Lord being the Lord and with God being my Father, if the earth belongs to God and I'm his son or his daughter, then that means this is my land too. And everywhere my feet tread, he's given it to me. What if you and I had a spiritual practice of prayer walking, where we specifically find the altars of pain in our city, whether it's a place where something tragic happened recently or something tragic happened historically, whether it's a place of historic division and contention in a city, whether it's a community that needs restoration, through the humility of prayer and through the boldness of going, the obedience to the Great Commission to go to the ends of the earth, to go to the nations, to walk the streets and say, you know what? Jesus is Lord over this place. What if that was the first step, no pun intended, to healing the land?